Now, before we get into it, this episode is brought to you by my Inspiring Kids Home program. Now, developing social and emotional skills for kids is the most paramount thing for their overall well-being. Getting kids to understand their emotions, getting to make friends with their big feelings, and also learning about self-acceptance, because one of the things is self-acceptance is so powerful. Once a kid can go, I am okay the way I am, then that can open the door to so many amazing possibilities. So, to get started on the home program, just click the links below. Should we just get going? So, are you ready?
Yes.
Are you ready, Gary? Okay, are you ready? Okay, you ready?
I thought it was on the phone, so Josh really kindly gave me some extra time to wash my hair.
Are you ready?
Yep, ready as all can be.
I'm ready.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Let's do it.
Welcome. This is part 3 in my special series talking about ADHD. Now, this episode we're going to be talking about ADHD in adults. So, today I wanted to speak to a very good friend of mine and the most incredible and multi-talented kids author in all of Australia, Sally Murphy. Now, Sally has written over 30 books in her career. She also in 2022 received a OAM, Order of Australia Medal, for her services to children's literature and to education. That's how awesome Sally is. She's also an academic. She loves reading, obviously, because she's a children's author, and she loves taking long walks along the beach. Even though I'd love to talk to Sally about the long walks along the beach, but I wanted to actually talk to her about her journey, about before she got diagnosed with ADHD, the actual getting the diagnosis, and how life has changed for her afterwards. So join me, pour a cup of coffee, take the guinea pig for a ride in the car while you listen to this, or pour a wine, whichever way it's going to be. But let's get to know the incredible Sally Murphy. Sally Murphy, thank you so much for joining me. How are you going?
I'm wonderful. Thanks, Josh, and thanks for having me.
Now, look, we're going to talk about something really important and also really personal for you, your diagnosis of having ADHD. Now, first, let's start exactly what made you feel, oh, look, something might be amiss, or that I might need to go and get checked out. What were the signs? What was happening in your life?
Well, to be honest, I always felt different, and I spent so much of my childhood and my teenage years, and my adult years feeling like I wasn't getting it, that there was some way of being normal that I hadn't got the memo. So I spent a lot of time trying to be normal, and normal was whatever the people around me were like, or what I perceived my role in that group or that situation was supposed to be. And it was only really, as an adult, I spent a lot of time sort of feeling like I was covering up, that people would say, you're doing really well, you're getting books published, you've got this PhD, all of these things. And I think, yeah, but they don't know what I'm really like, because underneath I was mad paddling, and I was always disorganized, and I'm messy, and I'm chaotic. And so I felt like I was a fake or a fraud. And I started to suspect that my feeling of maybe being a bit crazy was actually some form of neurodivergence. And a couple of my adult children were diagnosed with ADHD and one with autism. And when they were describing what for them was happening, I thought, well, isn't everybody like that? Because that's just like me.
Yeah.
And, I started thinking, well, probably me too. But I have to admit that I sort of thought, well, I don't need a diagnosis, because even with the diagnosis, I'm going to have to do the work, as I called it. So I just kept trying to do the work, trying to, manage my emotions, manage the symptoms, and to accept myself. And then I got an OAM last year.
Congratulations for that. That's just outstanding.
Thank you. And look, in the past, I've always really struggled with accolades for the reasons that I've said. And I kind of thought, well, at some point people are going to realize, that I'm a fake. And then I got this, this honor, and I thought, maybe I'm okay. Maybe, this is judged on my life's work and on, what people who I don't even know who it was who nominated me, what they've said about me. And the feedback that flowed in, and the congratulations and the messages, and it was just this outpouring that I didn't expect, and it was overwhelming. But it also made me go, well, if I am okay in everyone else's mind, why don't I feel okay? And I thought, maybe I do need the diagnosis to sort of help me make sense of who I am, what's going on in my head. And so that's what I decided to do, was that I, to pursue a diagnosis.
And so did that process, obviously to make that jump to go, I can manage this myself, I'm going to be okay. But to make the jump and go, okay, no, I'm going to need that extra help, that extra validation, I guess, is really what it's looking for. How did you go about that? Who did you approach? Did you ask around? Did you just do a Google? What happened?
I did, as I said, a couple of my adult children have been diagnosed, so I had some sense of the process. I think I had, a few years ago, I'd seen a new psychologist, and I'd sort of blurted out, everything that was happening in my life. And at the end I said, and I probably have ADHD. And she said, would you like a diagnosis? And I said to her what I've just said, but don't I have to do the work? And she said, well, you'll still have to do the work anyway, but a diagnosis might help. And I sort of thought, well, I'll come back to that. And I didn't. And then once I decided that I needed a diagnosis, I asked my GP for a referral, and I've been seeing the same GP for, 10 years. We have a pretty good relationship. He's treated me for anxiety and depression. He knows me really well. But I was very surprised when I said, that I'd like a referral, because I thought perhaps I might have ADHD. I was really surprised with how quickly he responded with, well, who would you like to see, rather than what makes you think you have ADHD. And the reason I was surprised by that is because, this is not me doctor blaming, but I wonder if he'd been waiting for me to say that, or whether I'd taken cues from him before about going there, because I suspect that some people, there's still some stigma about neurodivergence that there shouldn't be. But I wonder if he thought, here's this woman who's, I've got this really good relationship with, what will happen if I tell her I think she's neurodivergent? So I don't know, but he was very receptive. He gave me a referral to a clinic that's only sort of half an hour's drive away, and he said, this person is highly recommended for adults particularly. So that was really helpful. But there is I think pretty much worldwide, getting that referral is the first step. Actually getting in to see someone can be quite a long process. I think it was for about 4 months before I could actually see the person. The person who the referral was for was full, so they actually did pass me on to someone else in the same practice. And even then there was that delay. And then I went to see her, and by the end of the first hour appointment, she said, I think you do, but there is a process, there's a diagnosis process. And so one of the things is you need to fit the diagnostic criteria to be diagnosed. So I had to go away and do this. It was basically a survey of questions, but it was looking at both, did you have these experiences in childhood as well as in adulthood? So an ADHD can only be diagnosed if the symptoms are sort of permanent, so they must have been there in childhood as well. So that in itself was, I think, a useful process for me in going through all the questions, but it was also by then I'd done a lot of reading, and I had to be really careful that I wasn't having sort of self-diagnosed, having decided that's where I was. I had to be careful that when I went through this survey that I was not thinking, well, this is how I should answer, but this is actually how I was and how I am now. So, and I think the questions are set up to avoid that, in terms of there's lots of questions, and some of them I think seem to ask the same thing in different ways.
Yeah.
You know, so you can't, you know, I don't think it's something that you could just do this survey and then you're sitting there calmly in their office and they're saying, tick, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, in regards to your childhood, were you able to easily remember back to what you were like, or did you have people like parents still alive that you could actually talk to, or siblings?
I didn't didn't need my mother, so my mother's still alive. I didn't really ask her for help with the survey. I do know that when my adult children did it, that they did come and ask me questions, and for one of them, the tool that their psychiatrist was using actually required a second person to complete a survey that went straight back to them. So from memory, it was electronic. So that meant that the person that I said the things about didn't see it. So yeah, there was sort of different psychiatrists will use different tools, I think. So for me, I suppose I didn't have trouble with, because it wasn't asking me to give, you know, like, what did you do on the third day of year one, those sorts of things. So, you know, I could genuinely say, yes, you know, I remember this as a child. I remember feeling this way. I remember, you know, doing these things. So I didn't find that super challenging, because I find that my memory is actually fairly good on emotions and feelings. It's less good on where did I put my car keys or my mobile phone. So luckily it didn't ask me that question, but you know.
So I was going to say, because you mentioned that you've got anxiety. I've got anxiety too, and I find that sometimes there can be crossover between what ADHD can manifest as and anxiety. Do you find that there's any crossover with you, or sometimes they could similar sort of things?
Yeah, look, and the thing is, I suppose that if you have ADHD, it doesn't mean you can't also have, you know, depression or anxiety. The difference really would be the permanence of ADHD.
Yeah.
So you know, that's true. But one of the things that I will say is that I sometimes felt over the years that, you know, if I went to a doctor, you know, with the symptoms of my ADHD, that I was being told repeatedly that I was depressed. And that often was true. But the thing I suppose I could never get across was that my life never felt under control, and therefore it did lead to depression. But even when I wasn't depressed or I wasn't anxious, the things about, you know, executive dysfunction and disorganization and, you know, the never shutting my brain down thing, but they never go away. So I can be not anxious about anything and yet wake up in the middle of the night and my head is whirring. And what it's whirring with is the next episode of the show I've watched on TV, or it's, you know, events in a book I'm reading, but it's progressed beyond that. So my brain continues to process all the time, multiple tracks, even if I'm not stressed, not anxious, and not depressed. So there is definitely a crossover, and certainly, you know, I'm not saying, oh, I was never depressed or anxious, because those things are absolutely part of, you know, my experience. And, you know, this is, I suppose, one of the issues with diagnosis, particularly in women, is that it is definitely a problem for women that ADHD is underdiagnosed, autism is underdiagnosed, but women are far more likely to be diagnosed with depression. And I had experiences with doctors, not my current one, telling me I was depressed when actually I had quite serious physical problems. And the reason for that is now that I understand a little bit about some of the symptoms of ADHD, is that my emotional default is to cry. So if I'm happy, I cry. Angry, I cry. If I'm sad, I cry. And if I'm frustrated, I cry. And so if I go to a doctor and I'm in pain, I'm far more likely to cry than anything else. And therefore,
okay.
they'll say, well, you're depressed. And I'll say, well, that may be true, but that doesn't explain this pain in my abdomen. So there was one life-threatening situation where exactly that happened. And I actually, ended up in surgery. So, and that's a bit of a sidetrack, but I think people with ADHD do have problems with emotional regulation. And, women also are often seen as being emotional, and yet all humans have emotion. So when someone says being emotional, they actually mean, you're teary or you're, that you're uncomfortable with that emotion, whereas they're much more comfortable with anger, which is also an emotion.
Yeah, exactly. They've sort of got an idea what to do with anger as opposed to, or how they respond with it. So now that you've had the diagnosis, it's been a few months now, how have you changed?
It's really interesting because I did think that, given that I'd already arrived at that decision, I suppose, or that awareness for myself, I felt that I was doing all this learning about it, and I thought, what will happen is if I get this diagnosis, I'll go, see, told you so. And that I would feel, really pleased about it. Not like I'm so glad, that I have ADHD, but I'm glad that, I know what it is, and therefore, I can, deal with it. Now, one of the things about ADHD is it's never going to go away. There isn't a cure. But the other thing is that I am much more confident and accepting of who I am. But at the same time, there's been this kind of weird reckoning for me about, well, if I've been masking my whole life and acting, who I think I'm supposed to be, then which person is the real me? And so that, and you can't just throw away a lifetime of habit. And so I do still, find myself, preparing for a situation and thinking, how am I supposed to act in this situation? And sometimes that's actually, a fully formed thought that I have. How am I supposed to act? Other times it's, going through things like, I'm going to see these people, and these people will wear these kinds of clothes, and, I'll put this kind of makeup on, and all of those things, which a lot of people do. But for me, it's also, what will I talk about? What will the conversation be? And I very much change personas with different groups of people, which isn't a terrible thing, because it means that I can fit in with lots of different people. But then I'm like, am I doing that because that's authentically me, or am I doing that so that they will accept me? Yeah. And if it's so that people will accept me, then, I'm not being true to myself, and B, if I've got to be in a certain way in order to be accepted, then those aren't really the people I should be with. So that's been, I suppose, more confronting than I expected.
Yeah, and I suppose, and you can't take away a lifetime of adapting in those situations. No. And that's, how do you do that? So I'm going to have a left field question here, Sally.
Yeah.
One of the things about ADHD and neurodivergence is always feeling on the go, this energy, and as you said, your mind just.
Yep.
How does that fit with your creativity? And you have written over 30 books. You are just writing. You've got so many ideas. To the two, one causes the other. Are they related? I'm just going to throw it out there.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question, because one of the things that's happened this year, since I've been sharing my own diagnosis, is the number of people who've revealed to me, often in private, that they too are neurodivergent. And many of them are in the creative industries. And then I was kind of like, so is this a common thread, or is it that I just happen to know a lot of creative people and therefore this is, the same number as would be in the general community? And I think that actually it's the former. I do think that if you've got a neurodivergent brain, then your brain's always firing. It makes these creative connections. It does all these things. So that's really, really helpful. The thing I find, and it goes back to people saying, "Oh, but you've achieved so much," is often I don't follow through on a creative idea because the executive dysfunction, which I'm using the terms because they help me now that I know the terms, is that you can see the final result, but you can't always see the steps to get there. Yep. And so they seem insurmountable. So I had this really great idea for a story, but it needs, research, and it needs this and it needs that. And sometimes it just doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen because I don't do the work, and this is different work now, the work of actually sitting down and writing it, but I get so churned up with the doubt and but I can't see how I'm going to produce another book. And then when a book comes out, in the past I've often thought, but did I really do that? Wasn't it just the fact that there was a really good editor and a really good this and a really good that, because I can't see how I'm going to write the next book, so there's always this constant, there has been a constant sort of panic. And I think I have a book coming out next week, and I've got a book coming out next year, but my productivity actually slowed down for several years. And that, I think, is part of it, was that I did allow myself to get weighed down by a lot of this doubt. And then I wasn't really producing what I wanted to produce. So I feel like at the moment that I'm likely to become sort of, more productive again now that I understand myself a bit better, because it's like, this is what you always do. And I've got two beautiful writer friends who I see every couple of years. One's in Sydney, one's in Melbourne. And, nearly every time we get together, I say, I've got to quit now. I just can't do this anymore, and they've got to the point that they laugh at me. I mean, they're really gentle about it, but they say, I think we've heard that before, because I get really sort of like, oh gosh, I've got nothing left in me. The writing industry in itself is, as you know, it's hard. It goes in waves. You get rejections. People with ADHD are rejection sensitive.
It's not for the faint-hearted, is it?
It really isn't. But the thing that keeps coming back, bringing me back to it, is actually that I love making up stories. I love creating. And so, every now and then I say to myself, well, why don't you just create stuff and not worry about if it gets published, because in the end, if I love it, why don't I just do it? And part of the reason, I guess, is, you got to pay the bills, but it's also, I love it, but if it's not perfect, it's, so, tortured writer, which is probably a lot of creatives, if not all.
I think so. So, look, one last question, Sally. What lights you up?
What lights me up? Now, I cheated because I saw the little clip you made with all the other creatives, and they nearly all started, oh, that's a big question. Now I've said it anyway. Yeah, you could edit me and say, pretend. But I thought about it, and I think the thing that lights me up is connection. And, I have this wonderful family, and, when I'm with them, that lights me up. And then, when I connect with friends and when I connect with people through my books. So I think all humans want to belong. And if you go back to me as a child, and this sense of disconnection, the times that I really felt myself was when I was connecting with other people, or often as a child, I connected with the odd person in the book, the odd character. And I didn't realize that I was, looking for myself in those books. But I think when we connect with other people, even fictional ones, we think, there's someone either like me, or there's someone who understands me, or there's someone who, I want to be with. So it's not all about them giving you fulfillment. It's, it's mutual, but, people. And it's a funny thing to say, because I do spend a lot of time alone, writing by myself. I'm quite content by myself a lot, because I get overwhelmed in very, very social situations. But then when I come out of my cave and hang out with people, I go, that's right. People are
There's a whole world
important to
out
me.
there. Yeah. Oh, look, Sally,
Yeah.
look, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your personal journey with us. And I think a lot of people watching this are really going to relate to that. So if people want to get in contact with you, get your books, follow you and all that, starting point website?
I've got a website, which is sallymurphy.com.au.
Put it down there.
I have an Instagram, which is at Sally Murphy Author, and I have a brand new Instagram, which only has a few followers, so which is all about my ADHD journey, and it's called Midlife Divergence, and we'll put that in the show notes, as they say. And Midlife Divergence is my sort of take on what it's like to be diagnosed in midlife. I think midlife is a nicer term than middle-aged, because life's in it. But it's sort of my take on following that journey, because I think there are other people out there who are, find they're on the same path, or they're on similar paths, and, can help to know that you're not alone.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a great idea. People follow Sally on that one. Thank you so much for joining us, Sally. I really appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.